Have you ever seen someone who is clearly struggling with homelessness while you're stopped at a red light or riding public transportation? Or maybe you've been approached by someone outside a grocery store and wondered, should I offer food or money, or do I just try to ignore them like almost everyone else does? Our guest today is Elisabeth Jordan, founder of The Human Impact, an organization dedicated to befriending people who are struggling with housing insecurity and living on the streets. She is here today to address these questions and so many more, and what she has to say may surprise you.
Traditional etiquette says that politics, religion, and money should never be brought up in polite company. And we're here to discuss all three. I'm Debbie Hancock, a conservative and a Christian living in the Deep South.
I'm Arielle Gorin, a born and raised New Yorker and a liberal Jew. We're asking the hard questions and actually listening to what the other has to say.
Is Anybody Listening podcast starts now. Elisabeth, thank you so much for taking the time, because I know you said this has been the hardest, busiest week I think you've had working on the streets. And I know your kids weren't in school yesterday, so we do not take lightly the fact that you have paused your work on the streets during this snowstorm to be with us today.
It's blessed quiet in my home today.
Well, we'll let you get back to that shortly.
Yeah, exactly. After having everyone home for 4 days?
6 because the weekend.
Who's counting?
Yeah, who's counting? That's right.
I'm not counting.
As Arielle mentioned, Elisabeth Jordan is the founder of The Human Impact. It is an organization that exists mainly to befriend the homeless. I met Elisabeth when I first moved to Dallas. That is really when her journey began. And so I've had the privilege of walking alongside Elisabeth from the first day that she showed up on the streets in Dallas to the incredible organization that she has today.
We're so excited to hear more about it. Elizabeth, something that's been on my mind a lot as I've heard more about your story is, here in New York, where I live and where I grew up, interacting with the unhoused is almost a daily inevitability, right? The density is such that you'd really have to try very hard not to see that there are people struggling on a daily basis. But it is not like that in a lot of cities across the country. And I know that where you grew up in Dallas, in one of the wealthiest zip codes in America, you talk about how you were very isolated from that, from seeing that, from that kind of housing insecurity. So how did you come to understand the housing crisis, and how did you find yourself working in some of the most impoverished neighborhoods in your city?
It was such an unexpected journey for me. I was in the for-profit world in my 20s. I was on an up and to the right life path. Everything was going great. And I went through some different struggles that overlapped with each other. One was professionally. I lost my dream job. I was working in the music and entertainment industry, and a lot of my identity was tied up in my career. So losing that job wasn't just losing the job, it was really losing my sense of self and how I mattered in the world. At the same time, my husband and I have been married now 17 years, but at the time we were kind of in our rock bottom. I know no one who's married has ever gone through a hard time in their marriage. Uh, but we were kind of in our rock bottom, and that was also part of my identity, was getting married and having that relationship with my husband. And because two really key things of how I understood myself were in question, I had grown up in the Christian church, but in my 20s, I had really gone through a lot of doubts about who God was, whether or not he existed. But since my life wasn't working out so great, I decided to give God another try. And it took some time, but I really did go back to God and say, essentially, my plans aren't working out. If you made me, if you're real, then you made me for a purpose. What are your plans for my life? And I'm willing to do whatever you ask me to do. And it was through that journey where I began to discover other people who had written or done incredible work, not just in Dallas, but really around the world, in the United States and abroad, with people who were vulnerable. And then it was a journey of starting to encounter those people in Dallas. I tried to get a job at a nonprofit on the under-resourced sides of our city. All of those doors ended up closing on me. And in that time, there was a man named Larry James who led one of Dallas's most prolific nonprofits. He invited me to join him to meet the people he served. And I was like, sure, I'll do that. And then I learned that he meant people who were homeless. And I was like, I should walk that back. That's not actually what I want to do. So for me, it was going from a very insular upbringing where a lot of people looked like me, thought like me, a lot of similar experiences to me, to really going as far out of my comfort zone as I could to a part of my city where my only experience of it before this time was like, lock the doors. It's not a safe part of the city. And this time, I'm choosing to go show up on a street corner between a bus stop and a homeless shelter and encounter people who I avoided, who I wrote off, who I judged and stereotyped. So it was a really big experiment in how far I was willing to follow God, as I really did believe God was inviting me to this new place.
Wow.
Walk us through your first day.
I have so many vivid memories of this. I was driving my black Volkswagen Passat down from the north side of the city to the south side. Dallas is divided from a resource perspective along the downtown lines. If you're north of downtown, you're typically more affluent, and if you're south or west, you're typically less affluent. I remember just driving and thinking, I said yes to this. I really trust Larry, but all the way down being like, I should turn back now. What am I doing? Why am I choosing to do this? Turn back now. And somehow I got myself all the way down there. And I remember seeing Larry across the street from where I parked. And he is sort of fatherly, kind, but strong, gray-headed guy with this gray mustache, just like all this light, coming from him. And I remember seeing him and him calling out to me and being like, okay, I can do this. Like, if I can go stand next to Larry, I know I can be here. From what I expected, it was so radically different because Larry knew so many of the men and women by name. As they would be getting off of the bus and walking towards the shelter, he greeted them like they were friends. He didn't treat them any differently because of the circumstance called homelessness. At the time, it was so astonishing to me that he just treated people the exact same way I believed he treated me, the way I believed he would treat anyone he encountered. And so he was really, from the very first time I interacted with him on the streets, revolutionizing the way that I perceived of the people that I had been taught to fear or stereotype.
I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more. You went one time with Larry to the streets. How did it turn into what it is today?
Turning into what it is today is one of the greatest surprises of my life. I was pretty awkward. Like, I talked to probably 2 people. I was just hiding behind Larry the whole time. But as I left that first day and was reflecting on it, I noticed even though I felt really uncomfortable, I also felt very alive. And I really wanted to chase that feeling. So I decided if that's a place I'm starting to feel alive, I want to go back. So I kept going back every Thursday, just at this 2-hour time slot that Larry was doing. At some point, I announced to my husband, Austin, that I was going to do this as a full-time job. And he was like, oh, let's back that up. What ended up happening is I did pursue it as a full-time job. And the way it kind of worked is that I fundraised from people I knew who chose to say, yeah, you don't really know what you're doing. We're not quite sure what you're doing, but we believe that God is in this with you. They really saw that I was sincere about believing that this was not just a mission that I was conjuring up, but that God was inviting me into this mission. And so enough people said yes to that I was able to stop doing the part-time work I had been doing and do this full-time. I call my first 3 years my research and development years. And it's a time in which I was observing both the current model of homeless care, and I was beginning to set my stereotypes down to listen to the stories, the real life experiences of the men and women on the streets. And there are 2 things that I noticed. One is that in our country and in Dallas, we're really good about thinking of solving homelessness economically. We're really good at thinking we know people need shelter. We know they need job placement and training. We know they need rental assistance, right? We want them back up on their feet. But what I was hearing from people on the streets wasn't just an economic or financial need, but a relational need. They were telling me that most of them had been raised in an under-resourced community, and that the beginning of their story into homelessness wasn't the things that you typically think of, like addiction or mental illness, but it was actually the catastrophic loss of someone who was the most important to them in their family or even a friend on whom they depended. They will tell you, I lost my spouse or I lost my child. This sent me into an emotional, mental downward spiral. A lot of other cards fall because of where I'm headed. And then I end up on the streets and I see all the help available to me. Like, I see that I could meet with a caseworker. I see that there are steps I could take, but I feel very alone. Or I started numbing my pain with drugs or alcohol. And I'm having a hard time even believing that I'm worthy or that someone's going to do this journey with me. Because as human beings, when we're going through the hardest things in our lives, we really need other people around us to help us take that journey, because it takes so much courage to get out of the middle of kind of our darkest places. And so the mission of the Human Impact, which we began operating as a nonprofit on our own in 2016 to befriend the homeless, was really a strategic investment in what I feel like is missing in our homeless care system.
Wow. That's really remarkable. You touched a little on those misconceptions that people wind up on the streets because of drug abuse, because of some kind of socioeconomic factor. And then a lot of times it does have to do with these really personal relationships. Can you tell us a little bit more of those misconceptions around the unhoused and some other things that have surprised you in that sort of research phase that you talked about?
Well, lazy's a big one, that if people would just get a job, they could get out of the situation. I mean, everyone that I know has had full-time work for most of their lives.
Wow.
So if they're in a position right now where they're not working, it's almost always due to a disability or some kind of hospital stay that set them back, or something that they're still trying to work through. Like, a lot of people have had strokes that end up on the streets. And so normally there's some kind of factor that happens to them that means that they're unable to work. But then there are so many people on the streets who are still holding down part or full-time jobs while they're on the streets. And I know we have a housing crisis around the country. In Dallas, the most recent numbers I've heard are that we have 40,000 too few affordable housing units. People could be working 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week, and still it's just not enough to cut it. They're not able to afford a place to live. There's a lot of other complicating factors. When you think about mental illness, I like to break down the stereotype that people on the streets are crazy or mentally ill. I want to tread carefully here, because I know we've all encountered someone who's having a difficult time mentally, who is not living indoors. And I understand that that's true for some people. I would just say it's the minority of the people that we encounter. It's the most public minority. So when you encounter someone who's having an episode because of some kind of mental illness that they struggle with, you and another 1,000 people are having that same encounter. But most of the people that we're working with on a daily basis, yeah, they might have struggles with their mental health. I mean, who doesn't, right? They might have struggles with their mental health, but they are not inhibiting their ability to interact with another person in a way that would feel very normal to you or to me. Another one, addiction. I thought everyone was addicted. I would say that I am very strong on this. Addiction doesn't discriminate. Addiction happens equally to people on the streets as it does to people in homes. Truly, the difference in someone who is on the street struggling with addiction versus someone in a home is money. And the path to recovery is the same if you're on the streets as if you're in a home struggling with addiction. I have seen many people come to the streets not struggling with abusing alcohol or drugs, but their life is so depressing by the time they get there that they end up starting to use one of those substances to numb the pain of their situation. Who doesn't understand that?
Yeah.
To be human is to use things that we know aren't the best for us to numb the pain of whatever we're going through. So the addiction one really irks me. And I would really like people to think about how addiction impacts the entire human population and not put it on people who are experiencing homelessness.
For sure. I would like to hear more about what it looks like practically on a daily and weekly basis for you and your team. We've talked kind of high level about your heart for these people, but what does this look like practically?
We are in an area where a lot of the homeless services are concentrated. So because of that, people either live in a shelter in our neighborhood called Austin Street Center in the neighborhood we work in, or they live outside on the streets. So there are truly hundreds of people concentrated in a couple of blocks who are unhoused. And we are every single day out on those streets. Someone from our team, some group of people from our team are walking the streets. What that means is we're encountering people we know and people we don't know. We're going deeper to build trust and friendship with people we do know. We're trying to establish some kind of connection with people that we don't know. We are really focused on the subset of the homeless called the long-term chronically homeless. Those are the people who don't have that social safety net when they fall into homelessness. People who fall into homelessness for the short term, those are normally driven reasons like a job loss, but they're still rooted in society. And so that hand up that the system gives them is enough to get them out of homelessness. That's about 80% of people, and we're focused on the 20% that are the long-term chronically homeless who would need relational support, not just the economic support that the system can provide. So we're out on the streets. We have a position called a friendship advocate, and the name does what it says. They build friendship in the morning, and then the afternoon, they're turned towards that deeper one-on-one relationship building and advocacy for the individuals who have said yes to taking those steps in their own journey of ultimately leaving the streets, although there are people we work with who, because of a lot of different things, will never end up leaving the streets, and we don't abandon them. We walk with them as well. Those afternoons can look like going to a medical appointment with someone, accompanying them to Social Security office. They can look like making a phone call to someone they're afraid to talk to, like a family member from whom they've been estranged. The way a friend would help you do the hard things in your life that either you don't know how to do or you're afraid to do is what our friendship advocates and staff are doing most afternoons. We have a lot of ways that we gather as a community. We have a really robust, beautiful community where I really think our work gets multiplied. We have a thing called meet and greet we do on Tuesday mornings, and that's just a time of fun. We invite people in to this warm space that has couches and all the things, and people can watch a movie or play games. When you're in survival mode, it's hard to imagine a different life. Getting people out of that survival mode into a place of safety and where they can even play helps people begin to imagine a different life. On Thursday mornings, we have something called community prayer, and then we walk the streets together. In outreach, we have something called Come to the Table, where it's different than maybe how you've served in homelessness, which is behind a food line. We actually just sit around a table and eat together. And this is because of seeing how Jesus does it. If you read the New Testament books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus is around the table with all kinds of different people, pretty much at every turn of the page. And so we thought, well, that's pretty simple. Why don't we just all eat together? Families, kids, volunteers, our friends on the streets, our friends who used to be on the streets who come back. That's kind of what our work in our community looks like on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis.
That's such a powerful image, Elizabeth. When you think about, like you said, sort of more traditional soup kitchen or food light or something, there is this like stark dividing line between who's on one side of that table serving and who's on the other side of the table. And so you're right. This idea of everyone coming together around a table is such a powerful image.
Wanting to help people's mentality shift from I'm the one helping them to their humanity is as intact as my humanity. And even though I may have more to offer from a resource perspective or materially, who knows what kind of wealth they have to offer because of the hardships they've endured. We encounter people whose faith in God puts mine to shame every single day, who trust and believe in God when they wake up out of a tent every morning. So there is such a wealth of the men and women that we encounter on the streets. It's just not what we're taught to think of as wealth.
Yeah.
In an opinion piece for the Dallas Morning News, you wrote, "To mend homelessness, we must mend hearts." What does that mean? What is your vision for this? And what do you see being major inhibitors to this mission?
Well, by the time someone has ended up on the streets, they've normally gone through a lot of difficult things in their life. Rather than the thought that it's because of bad choices, it's mostly because bad things have happened to them. To be human is to sometimes make bad choices, but most of us have enough of a safety net that we can make a mistake and not end up on the streets. People will end up on the streets, and then they live in a society where 90% of people pass them by. Whatever trauma they bring to the streets, there is the daily trauma and isolation of being passed by. The U.S. Surgeon General said that social isolation is as harmful to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We're adding trauma to the men and women on our streets. One of the most powerful and beautiful things that we do, and that I believe every person needs, whether they're on the streets or not, is we look someone in the eye and we say, you're worthy and your life matters. And we believe everyone is made in the image of God. So we're going to say, like, we believe that you were made in God's image and your life matters and you have eternal significance. We love you and God loves you, and don't forget who you are. Man, that is so simple, right? But think about the hardest times in your life. We need someone to pick us up by the scruff of our neck and say, you are worthy. Your life matters. You are a beautiful soul. Whatever has been done to you and whatever choices you have made, this is not the end of your story. And I think this is a message not just for the men and women on our streets, but it's also a message for all of us who pass people by. Because if we really got how important our lives are and how significant each of us are, we could not turn away from the men and women of equal value who are on our street corners. So in a way, it's a message for all of us to say, no matter what's been done to you, no matter what you've been through, your life matters and you are worthy. And it is from this place of belief that we matter that we make different decisions.
That's so beautifully said. I want to talk a little bit about zooming out and focusing a little bit on the policy, because I think what you have to share about what you're seeing, how these policies affect people in their everyday lives, is so important. Encampments and tent cities that have sprung up in all kinds of urban areas and other, even suburban areas across the country have been a big point of contention. Can you share a little bit about how this has impacted your friends on the streets in Dallas?
I've been watching encampment closures for a decade or more. The first major encampment closure I saw happened in 2016 under an overpass just south of downtown Dallas. There were 400 people living there. What was really interesting about being on the ground observing this happen is that they made everyone move, and where they were able to move was about 2/10 of a mile down the street under the same overpass. It was just that this was out of sight of downtown.
Hmm.
So it was very interesting to see. We understand that people are unhoused and they don't have a good option, but that was really more about optics, that we
Mhm.
don't want to have to see people. And the honest truth is that it impacts businesses. And there are a lot of business leaders who don't want the homeless to be interfering with their businesses. I understand those considerations. I also think politicians have a really hard job. I am actually so glad I am not in the shoes of a lot of these people, because I understand it's complex and there are a lot of different considerations. I think the most important thing is whatever we choose to do, we're doing it with an eye towards the humanity of the person, and that what we're saying about them and how we're going about shutting encampments down or moving people reinforces their humanity. And there's a lot of ways that I've seen people do this wrong, like wearing hazmat suits to
Mm.
an encampment closure, or throwing people's stuff away in front of them, or most recently, last Thursday, the worst thing I've ever seen, which is waking people up from their tents, zip tying their hands behind their back, walking them under the overpass, lining them up, and letting them stand there for 3 hours with their hands zip tied behind their
Mm.
back. My colleague counted 25 police cars. It looked like a drug bust. I've never seen anything like it. It was excruciating as someone who loves and cares for the people who are out there, to watch how they were being treated. Dallas said that it was being done ahead of the winter weather to keep people safe, but in reality, from the people we've talked to, they dropped them off at shelter, or they had a choice to go to jail, but the shelters were full. There were no beds. So they were sent away from shelter. After several hours, they went back to where their stuff was ahead of the winter weather to get safe. And it had been straight destroyed. Listening to one of my friends explain, normally they throw their stuff away so they don't have to see it destroyed, but this time they just piled it all up and it was completely destroyed. And it was really hard for him to see his stuff destroyed. It's sentimental things, like my friend Julie's Bible that she got when she had been baptized, and it's practical things like this friend who can't walk very far got a scooter for Christmas, and he now doesn't have a way of transporting himself. Them saying it's like putting us back at square one of homelessness. He had just gotten his Social Security card. It's destroyed, his birth certificate.
Ugh.
So even if the intent was to keep people safe, the impact was not. And this is why it's so important for governments and police forces to work with people on the ground who are actually involved in that relational care and support for people on a daily basis. Because if you're going to have to do it, we need to be doing it the right way.
I've heard you talk about the I can fix it mentality and how that's problematic. Can you tell us more about that?
When we see someone on a street corner, we think there's going to be a huge burden on us. If I stop and say hi, if I roll my window down, if I'm on the streets of New York and I have an encounter with someone, they're going to put pressure on me and I'm going to feel like I'm not doing enough, or I don't know whether or not I should give $5. And we just end up avoiding the whole thing because we just don't know what to do. We throw our hands up. And what I wish we could do is take that pressure and burden off of ourselves and instead pick up really just seeing someone as a fellow human being and understanding that if their repeated experience was people looking them in the eye and having the courtesy of saying hello or sometimes having a conversation with someone else, it would really shape their own self-image. And as I said, our self-image really impacts what we choose to do in our lives. There are some simple guides I give people to help them when they're encountering someone, because I believe that we dehumanize people who are homeless when we just pass them by. But I actually think that we can feel dehumanized when they only see us as givers of material possessions, that they can actually treat us in a way that doesn't feel good to us, so we avoid it. What I like to do when I introduce myself to someone is just right out front of the gate say, hey, I don't have anything to offer you right now, but I wanted to say hello. Or I don't have money to give you, but I wanted to learn your name. My name's Elisabeth. What's your name? As a way to sort of reframe for that person why I'm there. I'm not there for a transaction. I'm there for a relationship. And the relationship may be a one-time thing. I may never see that person again, but it matters that I looked them in the eye and chose to learn their name and shared my name. And maybe we talked about the Dallas Cowboys losing, there was some human connection. Well, that really matters. And you know how I know? There are so many people when I stop. I just did this with my kids on Wednesday because they went to work with me a lot this week. We rolled our window down and we just said hi to this guy. And I was like, I don't have anything to give you, but we wanted to say hi. He was like, thanks, that helps me. People will tell you back, even though you're not giving me something transactionally, the fact that you acknowledge me actually helps me. It matters to me.
That's so beautiful. And honestly, just to corroborate that for a moment, it's New York City, it's cold, and I was taking a train out of Penn Station, and I usually try to carry like a few extra bucks for these moments, right? Because it happens. And I didn't have any cash on me. I think I just had my phone with me. And this man approached me and said, hey, I'm trying to get something to eat. And I said, I'm so sorry. I really don't have any cash on me today. And he just looked at me and he said, thank you for looking me in the eye and telling me that. Thank you for talking to me. So I'm so struck by what you just said, because I literally just experienced that last week. It's so true.
That's amazing. And I think anything that we can do to move from thinking transactionally to thinking relationally. You bring some money, you look someone in the eye and you have a conversation with them, or they want coffee. So you take them in with you to Starbucks and you actually let them stand in the line and order for themselves.
Absolutely.
Right? Like the things that say, I'm trying to relate to you as a fellow human being. I know you're not just someone I'm going to pass stuff off to.
I had a conversation recently with a group of friends where I shared an experience. I was at a store and somebody, I didn't know if they were homeless or not. I didn't know if this guy, was just poorly dressed and waiting for a ride or if he needed help. And I know a lot of people want to help the person, but they don't want to insult them by asking them, can I buy you something? What advice do you give in that situation?
Well, I just would say, great job paying attention, because not everyone's paying attention and noticing. At the very least, as a person of faith, I like to pray for that person. And I like to pray in that moment that if there's an opportunity to have some kind of connection, that God would help open that door, either in some way to bridge the gap between me and that person. Unless someone is asking for help, I generally don't offer it. And that's because it's gone poorly too many times.
I've heard from experience. Yeah. One thing I'm so curious about, because I was really struck in reading about your work and hearing you talk about it is your effort to include families, to include your own children in the work. And I'm so inspired by that. There's so few opportunities generally for all kinds of reasons, probably that involve, risk assessment and lawyers and things like that, of why like we can't bring our kids to sort of these bigger, volunteer opportunities. And so constantly searching for ways that we can involve our kids and things like that. When you started doing this work, what made you confident that you could even bring your kids along? What made you sure in that moment that you could ensure your kids' safety in that environment? And what kind of lessons do you think that they've learned by spending time with you doing this?
That's such a good question. And it's one of my passions because I've had all my kids while doing this work. And so I've kind of stumbled backwards into having to figure it out. When I was pregnant with our first child 11 years ago now, a lot of people said, don't keep going. It's not safe. It's not safe for you or your kid. It's not just you have to think about now. You have to think about your son. And
I may have been one of those people. I
don't remember you being
Debbie's
one of
the
them.
best because she's always willing to admit when she said something that she now like feels differently about. Or it's
and
amazing.
She's honest.
Yeah, she's really honest.
She'll tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I had to do some soul searching and decide for myself, was I willing to take the risk? Something at the time that felt really risky because the only thing I understood was don't do it, right? Like I didn't have a whole lot of models going ahead of me. I did have one friend who showed me the way by bringing her baby some to the streets. I at least had one person who had done it before me. Then it was this consideration of, am I going to withhold my child from people that I consider my friends? I understand that friendship is different in this context and that I'm not meeting them in my neighborhood or I didn't go to school with them or grow up with them. But there are people who I've heard a lot of their story. They know a lot of my story. They've come to my home. We have a true bond that we've built. And because of their circumstance, am I going to withhold my child from them? I decided that I didn't have it all figured out, but that I was pretty sure I was on this journey with God. And so I was going to keep going. And along the way, more would become clear to me. And early on, I did really practical things. If you had babies a decade ago, you know about the Moby wrap. So I would put my kid in the Moby wrap. And I was kind of like, I don't want you touching him.
Yeah. Right.
Don't touch him. Don't breathe on him. But I'll bring him out.
I said that to everyone, like relatives
That's right.
included.
Yeah,
So.
it's not just people on the streets. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, I am protecting my child here. There were ways that felt like I could dip my toe in the water early on and bring John, our son, out to the streets with me. As he got older and as I added 2 more to our family, what I began to see is that because so many people withhold their children from our brothers and sisters on the streets, when you have the courage to bring your children, it is so much joy and there is honor that is given to that person. They light up and open up in a way that they just don't with adults. And most of them have their own children, and sometimes they're estranged from them. The joy of getting to interact with a kid, to get a kid's questions, to see kids playing in the dirt. If you think about it, in all of humanity, what other groups of people do we withhold our children from? Besides the homeless? Can you imagine living in a world devoid of children? Yeah. Like children are the light of society. They are such gifts to us. Most of the danger that I have found in homeless communities isn't actually from the people who are unhoused themselves, but it really is from pimps and drug dealers who come into a neighborhood to prey on vulnerable people. There are really simple ways to assess whether or not a situation is safe. A lot of that is just not going alone, not going at night, making sure you're not going to a wooded area or under an overpass unless maybe you have someone who's already at work in the neighborhood. It's really great to go with an ally, someone who's already done that work to go ahead of you in something. There are a lot of practical things that we can do. I also believe that we have that spidey sense, that gut instinct. We confuse our gut instinct with our fear because we've just been taught to be afraid. If we can quiet that fear a little bit and remember that they're just a person like us, then we can listen to our gut instinct. And if someone is shouting or moving erratically, it may not be the best time to approach them. They're having their own experience right then, and it may just be good to move on. My family's life has been so transformed by the relationships with the men and women on the streets. They teach my kids things that I I can say to them, but like they teach them by lived experience. I have a friend who had a motorcycle accident and lost an arm, who first of all is making jokes about his missing arm and then tells my kids, basically, I was an alcoholic. I got on a motorcycle. I lost my arm. Don't drink and
Wow.
drive. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it's one thing for me to tell you not to drink and
You're like,
drive.
thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
That's a bit more powerful
Yeah.
than those prom stand-ups they used to do with a
Yeah.
car wreck outside.
But stuff like that
Wow.
happens all the time because there is this innocence and light that they see in the children, just like we do. And they actually lean in to protect, to use their own life experiences to shape and teach. And they do what just adults do in general. We want to shepherd and care for kids, and they're
Yeah.
doing the same thing.
Elisabeth, it's clear that your faith is so important to your work and it shines through in everything that you do. And I'm curious to know the way that you practice and the way that you have intertwined your faith into human impact. Do you see it translating to other faith groups or to other groups outside of faith communities? Curious because I think, it's clearly so central to your mission. And I wonder, there are people out there who are moved by what you have to say and maybe want to help, but they might be a bit uncomfortable or intimidated by the faith aspect just because they come from a different tradition or a non-religious background. And so how do you talk to them? Their interest might be piqued, but there's this piece of it that they can't quite wrap their brains around.
I think that we can just all get on the same page that every human being, every human life matters. Most people can understand that if you grew up in an under-resourced community and if you went through really difficult circumstances and then you end up on the streets somewhere, that you're in a pretty tough position as a person. And so I think we can call forth people's empathy and say, if you really did take the time to hear people's stories, you would understand that this is not them just making one bad choice after another, but a lot has happened to them. Call up that empathy that's inside all of us to say, even if I don't believe that right now, what if I set down my stereotypes? What if I set down my bias against them and instead chose to just pick up listening? What if I just did kind of my own research in a way? And the one thing I'll say as a caveat to when we are trying to interact with someone who is very different from us, or maybe that we have previously judged, is it really does matter what we bring to the table. If we bring internally kind of that contempt that we can
Mhm.
still feel, they're going to feel it too. And they're not going to give you back what you might hope to receive back. We have to do the hard work of setting those things down to interact with someone just on a human level. And if we will do the work of listening to stories, I believe that will begin to then change from a rational perspective how we see the unhoused in our communities.
I want to follow up on that a little bit. I know from personal experience, every time you've shared your story with someone that I know, they have been motivated to do more. And I know you have thoughts about the idea of doing more, and I'd love to hear about those. But what are some practical steps? There's going to be a variety of people, from folks that say, I want to do what Elisabeth's doing and I want to pursue this full time, to somebody who says, what can I do better when I'm walking down the street or driving my car to be more intentional in these interactions?
Just simply to make eye contact and to learn a name. There was a study that came out of an Atlanta group that said that people on the streets go 3 months without having someone look at them in the eye and 6
Wow.
months without hearing their name. All across the United States, if people just said, we're going to choose to look people in the eye and we're going to learn people's names, that would go a really long way in helping to change this issue. If you live in a city like Dallas, where you're driving by someone who's begging on a street corner, you can roll your window down. And like I said, honestly, just extending your hand, choosing to touch someone else's hand, that's a gesture of humanity to that person. Saying, hi, my name's Elisabeth. I don't have anything to give you right now. I wanted to tell you my name. What's your name? Something as simple as that can be so impactful. If you're walking down New York streets, I don't have as much experience with that, but maybe just planning an extra 5 minutes in your route if you know you're going to pass someone. And I love to sit down on the sidewalk next to someone or on the curb and just kind of take the posture that they have. We have to tolerate sometimes things like bad smells, and that's part of engaging with this group of people. That's just a reality. You have to be willing to do that. You have to be willing to push past some discomfort to engage with some people who are in this situation.
Absolutely.
We've talked a lot about what you've done. I want to hear about what you are doing next.
I love this question. It's very fun. We're calling it, the next 3 years are the human impact deeper and wider. And it's going to be our work of befriending. It's the core of who we are. We will be doing that as long as I have something to say about it. The deeper part is that we own some land just south of downtown, about 5 minutes. And we actually own an acre and a half, but we are just developing the half acre that we initially purchased. It will be a small community where people who are coming out of long-term chronic homelessness can live out their days alongside some people who have discerned a call to live missionally there. What that will most likely mean is that they're not coming out of the same background of homelessness, and they are there knowing that they're going to be just walking alongside people as they're healing and recovering from what's been so difficult. And then in the front of this community, we're going to have community space for all the programs we run now, come to the table, worship nights, but we're going to have a lot more expansive things we can do, like AA meetings, shared meals that we can have on a more regular basis in this space, gardening that we can do together. So it will be an opportunity for men and women still on the streets to come in and still be cared for through our work, and volunteers and donors to hopefully be able to engage with our work in a way that maybe feels more safe or more accessible to them. And then lofted on the second floor of that community space are more short-term dorm-style places so that people around the country can come and not just hear about our work, but can also embed themselves in it, whether that's for a couple of days, weeks, or months. They could stay there and really understand what our work is like in case they want to pick it up and do something similar where they are, which ties into the wider part of our work. We are in post-production on a documentary, and the purpose of the documentary is to change the national conversation on homelessness. We want to change how people see and treat the homeless around our country. We think until that revolution happens, this continues to be one of our intractable issues. What we hope is that it premieres coast to coast, and that when you're watching it and you're like, I'm so inspired, I want to go do something, we also are going to develop a playbook that will come alongside you that will be a step-by-step guide for how you implement this work in your own city.
That's amazing. Well, Debbie and I are both well-versed at creating comms playbooks, so we're happy to lend our skills pro bono when you need them.
Okay, I accept.
Okay, very last question. How can we, or anyone who is listening, best support your work, especially for those of us who may not be in Dallas? Are you aligned or have thoughts on how we can find people who are doing your kind of work, doing this critical work in their own communities? How do we help?
How you can help the human impact if you don't live here is you can give money. I mean, what nonprofit wouldn't say that?
Yeah, we'll take your
But
money.
yeah, truly. I mean, to support the mission we're already doing, to support where we're headed. We're in the middle of a capital campaign for the community that we're building. The documentary takes funds. So if someone wanted to give monthly to support our work ongoingly or wanted to help invest in where we're headed, come on with it. So that's an incredible way. The other thing is, as we're doing more of this work and talking more broadly to the rest of the country about this, I want to develop a list of resources for people in different cities that are relational-based ways of caring for people. So
Please.
I would like to gather from people the low barrier that you're talking about that allows individuals and families to connect with people person to person. And I'm hoping that as we continue this journey, I'll start to receive those resources from different people who hear the story around the country so that someone could come and actually learn, oh, I could go volunteer here to begin this journey where I am. With the playbook, we'll also be equipping people for how do you go to a street corner in one of your communities and try to start making friends yourself. But that's not going to be for everyone. So we want to give people tools, but I don't have them yet. So send them to me. If you have ideas or places in your own community where you can have relational-based ways of giving back.
It's some good homework. And that is so needed. I live in a area similar to where you grew up, where I'm not encountering homeless people on my daily commute. And when there was an influx of unhoused individuals that were coming through our neighborhood, I tried to reach out to several nonprofits to see how I could work with them and partner together. And most of them did not respond to me. And the ones that did, I was just given a donor wish list, basically, of items I could buy, which is great, but I wanted to do more. When you came to my town and you spoke to people, everyone was very motivated, and then you left, and we all said, "Oh, no. How do we do this? What do we do?"
So yes, we know we can start by giving, and we will definitely call on our friends and community to share those resources with you to the extent that they know of them in their communities, because I think establishing some database for across the country would be so brilliant and so fabulous. And we look forward to seeing your documentary.
Thank you. And I've got to plug, you can follow The Human Impact and Elisabeth Jordan on socials because we're dropping great content ahead of the release of the documentary in shorter form to try to begin to equip people and shift thinking ahead of the documentary.
We will absolutely share those links.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth.
So enlightening, so inspiring.
Great to be with y'all. Thank you.